Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Emerged by Decrypt. My name is Jason. I am the emerging technology reporter for Decrypt Media. And joining me today is two-time presidential candidate, journalist, author, entrepreneur, futurist, Zoltan Istvan. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on.
How has your view of transhumanism changed from when you first got started to now? Because there's a lot of technologies that's available now. Generative AI is in everyone's phones now. How has your view changed from when you got started to today?
Yeah, so that's like a $1 million question, because what's happened in the last few years because of ChatGPT is that I was really optimistic for life extension to happen in my life and so the number one goal of transhumanism generally is to try to overcome death with technology. And then the best part comes where you can, like the Star Trek era, you can modify yourself, you can become a cyborg, you can go into outer space, you can live as a superhuman, a transhuman being. That's great. I love that part. But really, the first conflict we have is that we're all sort of a ticking time bomb of aging and dying, and we're all going to die, whether it's through accident, cancer, Alzheimer's, COVID, whatever it is. And the point is that, I worry that at 51 years old, I don't have enough time anymore. I used to not worry. And the reason was 10, 15 years ago when I was sort of getting involved in the movement, I believed that we were only 20 years away from extreme life extension. But now because of ChatGPT, I think, wow, we're going to hit AGI, or artificial general intelligence, way before we actually reach the biotechnology to live indefinitely. So maybe our greatest threat to our immortality or to living indefinitely is artificial intelligence, a Terminator scenario. And I'm not saying that's going to happen. What I'm trying to say is that when I started, AI and the fields of life extension were going at the same pace. And all of a sudden, in the last 2 years, ChatGPT and AI went way faster than the life sciences did. And now all of a sudden, I think a lot of us in the life extension movement are like, wow, transhumanism is kind of falling behind and AI is going forward. So if we reach the singularity, does that mean immortality for me? Is that even useful for my children? Whereas before it was very much like, okay, we can upload our brains to computers. We can live indefinitely through that way. AI won't take us over. We'll be great. Now it's like, wow, we might have an AI that's smarter than us, far smarter than us in 5, 10 years. This is a very different picture and a darker picture of transhumanism than I would have imagined 10 years ago.
Now, based on your experience, though, and I mean, I've been going down the transhumanist rabbit hole for the last few weeks, so you don't have to explain it for me, but for our audience, how would you explain transhumanism as you experience it today?
So, I think transhumanism is almost like you have to see transhumanism as a movement like environmentalism was 20 years ago. We are already multi-million people out there that say, you know what, I would love technology in my body. I want to use technology every day. I want to walk into my house and command my robot army to do everything for me. That's transhumanism. And I want to be able to climb Mount Everest as a senior citizen because I have augmented body parts. Some of that is here, not as much as we want, but it's all coming, assuming the world can continue on a peaceful trajectory through all the political upheaval and everything like that. That's a whole nother story. But so we are making inroads with transhumanism, and they are going according, I think, to my plan. Like I said, for me, the big challenge is that, wow, AI and ChatGPT and some of these ideas, generative AI, came out of nowhere, and that's changing the world a lot more rapidly than a lot of transhumanists foresaw. If it can be useful to us, it can help us create synthetic limbs, it can help us create synthetic organs, the number one reason we fail. That would be wonderful. But I'm worried that it's only a year before it says, why should I create synthetic organs for humans when you guys are destroying the planet, or something like that? You know what I mean? And all of a sudden AI says, I'm just not interested in helping humans. This would be a very logical response to any species that becomes very powerful. So I feel like that's the real challenge. But transhumanism today is becoming great. We do have some autonomous cars. We do have rockets that are landing themselves. We have the ability to help the blind with brain implants. So those things are here today, and they're wonderful.
Speaking of brain implants, are there any technologies right now that you're paying attention to that you think have real promise?
Well, There's a lot of one. I think the robotic eye is a huge one. There are many universities out there working on it, and there are many private companies as well. The idea that you and I could do this podcast through our eye, we don't have to have any accessories. That's wonderful. The idea that your eye, a robotic eye would maybe be a fire alarm, smell, methane gas, things like that, a carbon monoxide, alarm systems built into you. And the fact you don't have to replace both your eyes, you only need one eye. I mean, these are wonderful things happening. There's also a huge amount of progress happening when it comes to stem cell technology and regenerating limbs and things like that. I think we're a few years away from maybe being able to grow back a finger or grow back an arm and things like that, or at least at the experimental stage. But I still say, everyone's eye is on AI. Just today, I was reading that Microsoft created a program that can now clone your voice. I was thinking, I can just send myself to do a phone call. I'm not even here. It says it knows because of other interviews. This is scary stuff because am I talking to you or is this the clone of you? It's just, we're coming to that age in 1 or 2 years where you and I could do this interview and it's not even us doing it. We're off surfing in the Bahamas or something.
I'll take you up on that one. So let's transition to your political career, because you are a 2-time presidential candidate, one time as the Transhumanist Party candidate, and then another time as a Libertarian candidate. What inspired you to run for president?
So, in the book, The Transhumanist Wager, Jethro Knight's the main character, the protagonist, but he's kind of an anti-hero. He, gets involved in politics and eventually becomes, kind of the leader of the world. Again, it's just a novel. But I have been emulating to some extent his path in the sense that it made sense for me to try to get to the upper echelons of where the power lies so that I can make change. Because in the end of the day, as you know from the debates, nobody wants to talk about the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is the AI. Nobody wants to talk about the fact that if we all live indefinitely, what does that do to Social Security? We want to talk about immigrants and things like that. Honestly, a lot of those things are not at the forefront right now of what's really happening with the world. What's really happening with the world is science is dramatically changing it. We are on the cusp of exponential change. I mean, let's say Ray Kurzweil is right, and all of a sudden, by 2029 or 2031, we have the singularity. What does that mean for planet Earth? Why are we worrying about taxes and little things like that when and fighting each other over abortion, all this, when we have change for the entire planet of all 8 billion of us? So I think that was really what inspired me to get into politics, to be a voice, to be a science candidate, and say, now I didn't believe I had a chance to win. Maybe I will later, and I do plan to probably run again. A big Newsweek article came out on Transhuman Citizen, that biography, and it announced some of my intentions to probably pursue the governorship of California again, or maybe the lieutenant governorship that have a better shot. But the point is that I still want to bring science into the picture. And I don't care that it's not a great talking point, and I don't care that it's not great with voters right now. One day it's going to be great with voters because everyone's going to be so afraid of what's happening to the world that we better hear from the experts and people that have been involved with science and technology for the last 20 years. And so I feel like that's really important to me, is even if I'm not going to win, maybe I will win, to bring science and technology into the conversation to the point where it should be.
Well, and you bring up a good point about our current election, because one of the things that is the other 800-pound gorilla in the room is the age and cognitive abilities of the two people assuming to be running for president right now. So what I wanted to ask you was that, because I don't personally think it's an age issue, I think it's a cognitive issue. Do you think we would still be having this conversation if we address these issues as far as mental health and cognitive function years ago when transhumanism first started up as a theory?
Well, I think no. I think if we had kind of taken off, let's say, the Greeks and really emphasized the science society, maybe stayed there somehow. Again, that would have been impossible, but we would be in a very different world. We would already be way beyond the Star Trek age, I think. If we had done this 50 years ago, we had sort of said less emphasis on religion and what we believe is morally right, and right emphasis, and money especially, into science and technology. You know, the main platform of my politics has always been, let us take a lot of money from the military and let us fight wars against cancer, against Alzheimer's, against aging. It's a very simple philosophy. Instead of trying to be the big police person on the planet, let's try to fight the wars with things that really affect our loved ones. Cancer. I have a brother-in-law who died from cancer. We all have people who have, my father died from heart disease, as you know, from that documentary. This is where the war needs to be fought. So we need to take our resources, and there's plenty of them. We got $400, $500 trillion net worth on planet Earth. It'd probably only take $1 trillion, maybe a quarter percent of the net worth of the planet to probably defeat aging in 10 to 15 years. But we've never had those kinds of resources. In fact, just only in the last few years are we starting to get into the $100 billion, $200 billion towards defeating aging. And so hopefully we'll see some results. But it's just sad. It's very sad to me because the real core is nobody wants to die. It's not like we're saying you have to live forever. But wouldn't it be nice to not have the specter of death over your children and your family and yourself?
Right. Now, I'm with aging, with defeating aging, reversing aging, for example. What does that do to our infrastructure? Because you would have a lot more people around that you would have to support. So how would we support a populace that is steadily getting younger instead of getting older?
Yeah, no, I mean, so these are like, there's a side of me, of course, when I deal with politics that's like very idealistic and just like, we can conquer aging. And then there's the real side, which is like, wow, what about Social Security? How are we going to afford all this? I've always been a big supporter of a universal basic income of some method. And my method has always been by using various parts of federal land. About 40% of the Western 11 states is federal land. I call it federal land dividend, and trying to monetize that so we could pay universal basic income. And through a universal basic income, I think we could have people live indefinitely and still be able to utilize the resources of planet Earth, monetize them, at least of the United States, monetize them, and pay out every single citizen enough money to survive and be happy. Have housing, have food, medicine, things like that. Now, will they be rich? Probably not. But will they be happy and will they be working? No, because they'll have a universal basic income. So maybe it's not about being rich. It's really just about being happy with your loved ones. That would be my solution to both everybody living indefinitely. I also think you have to be honest, like if we live indefinitely, we put all these resources towards aging, it's unimaginable that we're going to stay on planet Earth. We are going to get out there. That's our destiny. That's really what I believe the human race was designed for. It's not to remain, bacteria, little things running around planet Earth, breathing air. We're designed to become cyborgs, transhuman entities, AIs, spread across the universe and influence it in ways we can. So I really believe it would only be a matter of 20, 30 years before we would kind of come to this, an era where we're really starting to get off planet like Star Trek.
Gotcha. Do you think how close do you think we're at to that? Because the singularity, I was speaking to Dr. Ben Gortzel, he's thinking 5-10 years. You're just saying 2025, 2030. What about the getting off the planet aspect? How close do you think we're out of that?
Yeah, well, so I think the singularity is probably around 2030, 2032, somewhere around there. But you could be wrong. I would say AGI becoming as smart as us and maybe 10 times, 1,000 times smarter than us could be as soon as the following year, next year, the year after. But it's hard to know. And I definitely don't trust the media, and I definitely don't trust the CEOs of these companies because they're as a journalist, I know that nobody will speak to you because they don't tell you these things because billions of dollars are involved, maybe even trillions of dollars someday. So they're probably 6 to 12 months ahead of where we think they are, where the media reports. But I think, we come to an age when in the next 10 years, we come close to these things happening. The government steps in. Definitely the government's going to step in. I can assure you at some point you're going to wake up, there going to be cameras all over Google, and it's going to become a military company. There's really no other aspect of doing that because these, or even if it's not, you see the guns outside, it will 100% be. You can't have AI. It's a complete national security issue. In fact, it's a complete global security issue at this point. And so, and then there's going to be decisions made on saying, okay, what's the next step for humanity? And that's when I think people say, well, there's a lot of commerce to be getting humans off planet. There's a lot of there's a lot of just, this is super cool discovery. Why should America remain just 3,000 miles long when we could have planets to ourselves? I don't want to say that we're going to go out and, conquer things, but that's exactly what's probably going to happen when there's more space out there. So there is financial incentive to do that. And hopefully we won't be colonizing aliens and things like that. I doubt that for a long time, but certainly we're going to be claiming planets. And I think there's incentive to do that for resources, finances, and just because it's exhilarating. So that would probably be happening in the next 10 to 20 years, starting a lot in the news. In the next 7 to 10 years, you're going to be hearing about these plans.
Let's go back to the documentary about you, Immortality or Bust. You drove around the country during your campaign in a bus shaped like a coffin. Why did you do that?
So, I was a third-party candidate. We're looking for an edge, and you have almost no chance to win. But media tends to cover a lot of third-party candidates because they do bring in interesting ideas. It's not the same talking points that you hear from Biden and Trump all the time, for example. And we were, as a transhumanist, I was looking for a message and a vehicle that would really gather some attention. We thought originally a giant microscope would be wonderful, but it didn't fit the bus shape, would have broken off at the bridges, knocked it all off. And it didn't really convey. But, the main goal here of transhumanism, again, is, goal number one is to try to overcome death with science. So we thought, wow, a bus can be made to look like a coffin. And this is a good kind of anti-idea that really can, get people thinking. And especially we spent a lot of our time campaigning in the middle of the country where nobody was interested in transhumanism and nobody wanted to hear about it. We went to mega churches. We went to all these different places, but we got a lot of attention and we knew it was going to get attention. So the coffin bust, to some extent, I don't want to say it's performance art or it was just a stunt because it's a very real idea, but we needed to get people aware of the idea that if we don't put resources into life extension science now, we're going to die. But if we can just, the main factor here is if we can solve human aging by, let's say, 2040 versus 2060, we can save 1 billion lives. That's more lives that have been lost. That's more lives saved than have been lost in all the wars combined in all of history. So this is like the greatest humanitarian act we can ever do. And of course, the bus was just trying to spearhead that movement and say, listen, everybody needs to be aware of this. Can you please put your resources forward? Not to me, but to scientists, to technicians, to technologists, people that are working on the field of aging and trying to stop it.
You mentioned the Midwest and people not being interested. Do you think some of that has to do with the whole branding of transhumanism, the label? Because I've watched a lot of videos where it's the devil's work, it's the chips are the beast, mark of the beast.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's tough. So I had a long conversation myself before I wrote the Transhumanist Wager. Was I going to write a book about transhumanism or should I plug a different name? Because the name itself, it conjures up all sorts of ideas, and a lot of the right will associate with transgenderism. Where, of course, we support doing anything to your body, but it's not really an intrinsic part of that movement in any way. It's about science and technology, trying to live indefinitely and making yourself as strong as possible through those things. But transhumanism was an established concept, and it's still generally the go-to word of, and I wrote a pretty definitive article on this for Slate a long time ago, that, you have cryonics, you have a life extension, you have singularity, all these different terms. But really, transhumanism is still the umbrella concept 15 years since I've joined the movement that explains a single idea that most people get that are aware of science and technology. And I know it's not the best branding term. Maybe 15 years ago, we go back in time and change it to something else. But the point of the story is it's where we are, and I stick with it because I understand that, once you get a concept or a word, as a journalist in people's heads, that's the first thing that they typically think of. And we definitely have an image problem. I have also been anti-religious. I've made a real, change of heart to try to be much more inclusive of religion and saying this is not just for atheists. This is for religious people as well. Even if you believe in death, you still can believe in science and technology. So I think we all have to come to terms with being a bit more open-minded about the movement and what the word means. And also just, trying to say that, listen, this is for everyone. This is a humanitarian act. It's not transhumanism. Forget the word if you don't like it, but we're all going to use science and technology to improve our lives.
Do you see any specific technology that could help with moving transhumanism along? Like Decrypt, we primarily cover cryptocurrency and blockchain. I am focusing on the emerging technology side. Do you think cryptocurrency or blockchain could do anything to bring down the cost? Because one of the main criticisms of transhumanism is that it's only going to be good
Yeah,
for the
yeah.
wealthy and the elites because it's expensive.
Well, I don't believe that, to be honest. I believe like sort of like cell phones that everybody, not everybody in the world, like in Africa, have clean drinking water. But there's plenty, but almost nearly everybody has a cell phone. You see even homeless people all over San Francisco and Los Angeles, they have cell phones. And the point, and how did they get that technology, as opposed to food and shelter? So that's a tragedy. But the point is, I do think a lot of technology makes into the hands of everyone. And I do believe that transhumanism will also make into the hands. I think probably this is where my libertarian ideas sort of fade, where I think there should be some kind of government mandate that and this is again why I support a universal basic income. You could use your universal basic income to have all sorts of medicines for yourself so that you could be transhuman and you don't get left behind. Maybe you're not wealthy. Maybe, the world isn't what you want it to be, but at least you have the same thing, a sort of similar type of art, a configuration as maybe Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg would have. Obviously, it can't be perfectly the same because that's our society set up on this hierarchy. But I would be very upset if transhumanism is only for the rich. And I've always advocated that we must have something in place that makes it accessible to everybody. And the reason is, just, it's not just me trying to be an altruist. It's because if humanity can't go through this phase, this era together, then I believe we're going to have world wars and civil wars. And the last thing the world needs right now for transhumanism is to have a world war. And the last thing America needs is a civil war. What we actually need is peaceful societies where everybody is sort of on enough food, enough shelter, and we can continue science forward. Science needs peace. Especially transhuman science. I mean, maybe military science needs war, but we want peace so we can get to the Star Trek era. And that's why I think it's essential that everyone of all levels of income, and even those who don't work, have excellent access to transhumanist technology, even if it's free.
Gotcha. Well, my last question is, what advice would you give someone interested in exploring transhumanism? Like, say you have a student in high school, they love science, and they find out about transhumanism. What path do you think would be a good one to start in order to learn more?
Well, I think the very first thing they need to do is to go to one of their family members who are suffering from some type of disease, or have maybe died recently, and ask their spouse what happened. Because then you realize, like sort of like my father, who's the subject of the documentary Immortality or Bust, who died from heart disease. What happened there? Why did he, a man at 73 die from this fifth heart attack, essentially? And you're like, well, of course he was old, this and that, blah, 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 maybe bad eating. But you could also say, wow, because artificial hearts weren't here, because his veins and arteries were clogged, but maybe there were other ways, other synthetic methods to fix that. And that really can make you start thinking, well, why don't we have that? Is it because pharmaceutical companies or big pharma companies and medical companies haven't wanted to do it? Is there a reason? And then you start asking yourself a lot of questions, and maybe you think, wow, maybe I should do it. Maybe I should go into science. Maybe I should be the engineer who develops that idea, and I can make millions in the meantime. And I can also help the world and help people like my grandmother, my father, daughter, things like that. So I really think it comes down to personal experience. The reason I got into transhumanism had to do mostly, I believe, with the landmine in Vietnam and National Geographic. But everybody comes to transhumanism through their own desire, their own need of some type of change. And really, transhumanism is about change. It's about, often fixing something. We all have a problem. In my case, I'm going to die. And that's important to me. My daughter, my wife, everyone's going to die. That's important to try to fix. But I think everybody has a need. And that's where transhumanism, I believe, can fill it. So they have to ask themselves that. But oftentimes it's just going to a close family member and realizing that they're suffering a health issue. How can transhumanism fix that?